Growing up as a kid in the 80s was pretty cool. We did fun things on the weekends like head to the local video store and rent movies on VHS and Nintendo games. I would pick a Nintendo game, but my parents would usually grab a movie for themselves, and it was somehow always rated R. It's weird looking back on movies today, as even the most action-oriented are still family-friendly and don't have the hard stuff we saw in movies back in the 80s. As a kid, that elusive R rating was like a rite of passage because we saw and heard stuff in those movies that we probably weren't supposed to, like graphic violence and gore, language that we could never repeat without fear of being grounded, and of course nudity. Sometimes brief, but more often than not explicit. That leads me back to Nintendo games, as parents saw them primarily as a children's toy with no chance of the same filth they were watching ending up on the Nintendo Entertainment System. But they were wrong, and some of these movies ended up having incomprehensible releases on the Nintendo Entertainment System. I'm MichaelBtheGameGenie, and on this episode of Video Game Nostalgia, we'll be looking at R-rated movie games on the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Goodbye.
Right off the bat, I want to tell you that for the purposes of this video, I am not including A Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th on the NES. While it is so surprising to think that they make games based off R-rated horror movies on the Nintendo Entertainment System, that's a little too on the nose, and maybe we can come back and look at that another time. This video focuses primarily on movies that were rated R, and you wouldn't think that there would be much of an interest from a child to play a video game version. In 1987, Ocean released Platoon on the NES. Before we go on an Ocean tangent, it was actually developed by Data East and Sunsoft, two companies who have legit cred in the 8-bit era. The game was based off Oliver Stone's Platoon, which was released the previous year to cinemas worldwide, starring Charlie Sheen, Tom Berenger, and Willem Dafoe. Yep, that's the face of nightmares right there. Platoon tells the story of a young recruit in Vietnam who faces a moral crisis when confronted with the horrors of war and the duality of man. Based on that description alone, you can see why it's so perplexing to think that a video game based off this franchise would be something kids would be interested in. How do you translate the depressing narrative of this movie into something fun and enjoyable? Turn it into a side-scrolling shooter game, of course. I can't go into too much detail with a full review of the game as I haven't played it that much. From what I have played, the game is really hard and really unfair. The controls are kind of frustrating as you have to press up to jump as well as up to move to the next level of the maze, and often when I am trying to go up, I will jump instead. Needless to say, the controls are not intuitive, and that's a real problem as the enemies come at you fast and furious, and you do not have the time to avoid them unless you have mastered the nuances of the controls. I will say that while some people are pretty critical of it because it isn't straightforward, it does make an interesting attempt at going outside the box, and I am looking forward to spending more time with it. Before Deadpool broke cinema records as an R-rated superhero movie, there was Darkman. Darkman was directed and co-written by Sam Raimi of Evil Dead fame and told the story of scientist Dr. Peyton Westlake, who was played by the world's toughest man, Liam Neeson, who was developing a new form of synthetic skin when henchmen break in and burn his face in acid and blow up his lab. Luckily, he survived the explosion, and doctors use a radical treatment cutting off his nerve endings, which cause him not to feel pain, you know, like Liam Neeson in real life, and gives him super strength for some reason. Also, like Liam Neeson in real life. He then uses this synthetic skin to create a new face, as his was hideously burned by acid, but it can only last for a limited time. He also makes copies of his enemies' faces and starts his revenge plot. As a kid, I loved Darkman, but I was terrified by his burnt face. It really creeped me out, and I can see why most parents wouldn't have let their kids see this movie. Darkman was brought to the NES by Ocean, and I mean full Ocean this time, so no one else to blame. It's a side-scrolling action platformer that sees Darkman punch, kick, and swing his way through multiple levels before facing an enemy gang leader at the end. They do a cool job of tying in the element of the synthetic skin face into the game, as it basically develops the time limit for the level where Darkman has to assume the identity of each gang leader for each level. I have never really enjoyed playing Darkman, it's just something with the way the character controls that throws me off. The premise is fine, and I think it does a good job of portraying the film, and even the character sprites and art looks good. It's just how he controls that has always thrown me off, and I can't even get past the opening stage. Okay, so this one almost gets a pass. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger, and almost everything he did was money to kids in the 80s. But then there was Total Recall. Total Recall was not your typical action movie, as it really was more of a sci-fi thriller. That screwed with your mind, and still to this day, I don't know what was really going on. It stars Arnold as Douglas Quaid, a construction worker who is having dreams of events on Mars. He decides to check out Recall, a company that provides virtual reality vacations. The process seems not to work as Douglas finds out that he is actually a secret agent who is covering up a giant conspiracy, and strange events unfold that leads to him killing his wife, heading to Mars, meeting gross mutants before saving the day. Or did he? Oh yeah, did I mention the chick with the 3 boobs? Yeah, that was probably the biggest thing kids my age took away from the film. Like almost every other property involving Arnold at the time, it was developed into a video game by Acclaim and Interplay Interactive. It's a side-scrolling action platformer that isn't anything special, but by no means is it bad. Graphically, it isn't the greatest release on the NES, but it actually does a very good job of following the events and concepts presented in the movie. This is very apparent in the boss fight at the end of the first level, where you actually have an altercation with your wife before Richter shows up with his machine gun. And another nice touch is on the second level when Arnold has to go through the X-ray detector that was shown in the movie. I haven't been able to get past the second level so far in this game, and haven't looked up any further online, so the jury is still out if we run across the woman with the 3 boobs. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed. So guys, that's my quick look back at R-rated movie games on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Are there some R-rated movie games you feel that I have left out of this list? Let me know in the comments down below, and perhaps we can revisit this topic in a future video. Thank you very much for watching and sharing in my video game nostalgia.